There comes a moment in every person's life when the world finally stops pretending. Not with explosions or betrayal, but with a quiet shift that feels more revealing than any dramatic collapse. A moment when someone dismisses your effort without blinking, delays your needs as if their priorities are commandments, or treats your patience like an infinite resource designed for their convenience. And it doesn't feel like an attack, it feels like exposure. A calm unmasking of how the world actually works. A gentle but brutal realization that the rules you were raised on were never the rules that governed anything. And in that instant, a part of you that once felt permanent begins to lose its shape. Not loudly, not violently, but decisively. Because innocence doesn't shatter, it dissolves. And what replaces it is a clarity you can't unsee. A clarity that whispers that goodness, without strategy, is nothing more than an invitation for exploitation. This shift doesn't kill your desire to be decent. It kills your desire to be naive. And you start noticing the quiet machinery behind human behavior. The subtle calculations people make when they sense you won't resist. The invisible exchanges where your patience becomes their advantage, your silence becomes their comfort, and your willingness to help becomes a responsibility you never agreed to carry. These realizations land like slow bullets, gentle but irreversible, rearranging the way you understand yourself, the way you interpret interactions, the way you reflect on the imbalance between what you give and what you get. At some point, you stop calling the imbalance coincidence and start calling it a design flaw in the version of yourself you inherited from childhood. A version built from lessons that were noble in theory but dangerous in practice. Because they told you to be patient, humble, forgiving, generous, understanding. But they never told you the truth that actually matters. The truth that changes everything. Without boundaries, every virtue becomes a weakness. Kindness becomes exploitation. Humility becomes invisibility. Patience becomes permission. Understanding becomes self-betrayal. Generosity becomes a magnet for people who know how to take, but never learned how to reciprocate. And you didn't learn this in philosophy. You learned it the moment someone realized you wouldn't push back. As this clarity grows inside you, you start replaying old conversations with new eyes. You remember the times you downplayed your discomfort because confrontation felt heavier than silence. You recall the moments where you gave more effort than you received because you believed reciprocity would arrive naturally. You realize how many situations you tolerated that chipped away at your peace because you mistook adaptability for strength. None of those choices protected you. They only trained people to expect more from you than they deserved. And that training created a pattern others relied on while you remained unaware you were the one sustaining it. But when your awareness finally rises, the pattern begins to break. Because you no longer absorb emotional burdens you didn't create. You no longer rush to fix situations that were never your responsibility. You no longer convert your discomfort into excuses that protect someone else's comfort. Instead, you start watching the world with a colder, cleaner, more grounded perception. You begin understanding that respect is not earned through sacrifice, but through selective access. And affection, loyalty, and attention increase the moment you stop offering them by default. Not because others become better, but because your boundaries force them to be. This shift doesn't make you cold, it makes you precise. And precision changes everything. Because you start choosing where your energy goes, instead of letting it leak into every direction that demands it. You start treating your peace as something non-negotiable. And you start acting like someone who finally understands that worth is expressed through standards, not through suffering. And once you make that internal decision, people feel it even before you speak it. And here's the part most people never confront. The part that separates the grounded from the gullible. The moment you stop being endlessly available, you stop being endlessly used. Because people don't value sacrifice. People value scarcity. And the more disciplined you become about access, the more disciplined others become in how they approach you. One of the deepest changes arrives when you stop treating your intuition as an overreaction. Because intuition isn't a warning siren, it's a detection system. A quiet internal analyst that notices patterns your emotions haven't processed yet. It whispers long before it screams. And you used to ignore it because you were conditioned to give the benefit of the doubt. But doubt never saved you, intuition did. Every single time you were wise enough to listen to it, as your internal architecture continues shifting, you finally recognize the cost of silence. Because silence isn't always maturity. Sometimes silence is self-erasure. And every time you stayed quiet to keep the peace, you created a war inside yourself. People don't value the peace you protect for them. They value the standards you enforce for yourself. Once this realization settles into your bones, you stop treating silence as a shield and start treating your voice as a boundary. This transformation begins to reshape your relationships too, because you stop believing connection is built through endless sacrifice. You start seeing that real connection comes from shared responsibility, mutual respect, and reciprocal effort. Suddenly, you notice that people who truly care about you welcome your firmness. They appreciate your clarity. They feel safer around your standards than they ever did around your softness. While people who only valued you when you were overly flexible begin to fall away, not because you became worse, but because you stopped being easy. And when you stop being easy, you start being respected. And this is where your new identity begins forming, quietly, deliberately, unshakably. When you begin seeing people without the filters you were raised with, the world becomes sharper, clearer, almost unsettling in how predictable it suddenly is. Because interactions that once confused you now expose their patterns instantly. Motivations that once felt hidden now appear obvious. You start realizing something that changes the way you walk through life. People rarely act based on what they say. They act based on what benefits them. And this doesn't make them evil, it makes them human. But understanding this forces you to reassess every disappointment you ever experienced. Because most of your pain never came from cruelty. It came from misalignment between your expectations and the incentives guiding the people around you. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. This clarity becomes even sharper when you analyze the way you once gave trust. Because you didn't give trust carelessly. You gave it because you were conditioned to believe trust was a virtue instead of a currency. You spent it on people who couldn't even afford honesty, expecting sincerity simply because sincerity came naturally to you. You didn't realize that trust must be earned through consistency, accountability, and reciprocity, not words, not promises, not emotional closeness, but patterns. And when you finally start giving trust selectively rather than automatically, your entire world reorganizes itself. The ones who relied on your openness lose access. The ones who value your integrity rise in importance. And the ecosystem of your life becomes healthier by design instead of by accident. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you start analyzing people through their patterns instead of their apologies. Because apologies have a softness that makes them easy to believe, but patterns have a brutality that exposes truth without mercy. And you realize that many people apologize to reset your forgiveness, not to change their behavior. Once you begin judging people by consistency instead of charm, your tolerance decreases, but your peace increases. You stop defending actions that contradict your standards. You stop arguing with red flags. You stop giving chances to patterns that have already revealed themselves. Instead, you step back and allow people to show you who they really are without interruption. This psychological maturity sharpens your relationship with power too. Because you finally see that power isn't loud, aggressive, or dominant. Power is alignment. The ability to keep your internal values and external actions connected no matter who is watching. No matter who is pressuring you, no matter who is tempting you to betray yourself. People instinctively sense this kind of presence. It's the reason certain individuals command respect the moment they walk into a room, even if they say nothing. Their decisions don't wobble. Their boundaries don't bend. Their direction doesn't depend on applause. And their sense of identity isn't leased from the opinions of others. Power becomes quiet when insecurity dies. Because loudness is often the mask of weakness, the performance of significance. But quiet certainty is something different, something heavier, something unsettling to those who rely on noise to feel important. You start noticing that the people who talk the most carry the least, while those who observe in silence see everything. Silent power doesn't invade a room, it shifts it. It redirects attention. It influences without announcing itself. This awareness begins reshaping how you handle conflict. Because conflict no longer feels like a threat, it feels like truth. The louder someone becomes, the more information they reveal about their insecurities, their fears, their unhealed wounds. And once you understand this, you stop fearing emotional aggression. You stop matching people's intensity. You stop giving your power away through reactivity. Instead, you remain still. And that stillness is not passivity, it is psychological leverage. Because when you don't mirror someone's emotional chaos, you maintain control of the interaction. And people sense that you're not playing the same game they are. As this internal refinement continues, you begin distinguishing intimidation from respect. And you realize they are not the same. Because intimidation is temporary and built on fear, volatility, or social dominance. But respect is sustainable and built on integrity, consistency, and self-control. And you start choosing respect because respect builds alliances, while intimidation builds resentment. Your decisions start arising from long-term clarity rather than short-term ego. Slowly, you begin seeing the invisible hierarchies operating in every social environment. The unspoken structures that determine who people listen to, whose words carry weight, who sets the emotional tone of the room. And you realize that influence doesn't belong to the loudest, it belongs to the most aligned. And the true leaders are the ones who move with intention even when no one is watching. The ones whose internal compass doesn't lose direction under pressure. The ones who remain steady in environments where others feel unstable. This new clarity forces you to confront something darker and more honest. Many people operate from unaddressed wounds rather than conscious intention. Their reactions come from fear, insecurity, or past failures rather than awareness. And once you recognize this, you stop taking behavior personally. You stop absorbing emotional chaos that isn't yours. And you start seeing through a psychological lens instead of an emotional one. This perspective gives birth to a new form of empathy. An empathy that doesn't weaken you. An empathy that doesn't demand self-sacrifice. An empathy that understands struggle without inheriting it. An empathy rooted in clarity, not compliance. And with all of this evolving inside you, your identity begins solidifying, not as a mask, not as a performance, but as a compass. A stable inner structure built from the decisions you keep, the standards you protect, the principles you refuse to betray, and the direction you choose even when no one agrees. This identity becomes the foundation for the next stage of your transformation. As your identity strengthens, your relationship with ambition begins to evolve. Because ambition no longer feels like a distant dream waiting for permission. It feels like a responsibility, a daily discipline, a commitment to becoming someone you can respect when the room is dark and no one is watching. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop waiting for external validation to ignite your drive. Because you finally understand that momentum doesn't come from clarity. Momentum creates clarity. And every small action you take begins compounding in ways you never noticed before. Slowly turning you into someone whose progress can't be predicted, stopped, or controlled by anyone outside yourself. that you begin valuing consistency over intensity. You recognize that most people fail not because they lack ambition, but because they lack discipline. Because they chase emotional highs instead of building emotional endurance. Because they act when they feel inspired instead of acting because they have a purpose. And you realize that consistency is a rare advantage in a world addicted to impulsiveness. The moment you become consistent, you become dangerous. Not in a reckless way, but in a directional way. Because every step you take is intentional, anchored, and aligned with a vision others can't see, but can't ignore. As this discipline deepens, your standards begin shifting. Not as rules you impose on others, but as agreements you make with yourself, invisible boundaries that quietly shape who you allow into your life, how you invest your time, and what you tolerate. When your standards rise, your environment rearranges itself. Some people adjust to meet you at your new level. Others drift away because they relied on the version of you who expected nothing, demanded nothing, questioned nothing. And when that version of you dies, the relationships that depended on him die with it. This loss doesn't break you, it refines you. Because meaningful loneliness always comes before meaningful alignment. As your standards sharpen, your relationship with time transforms too. Because time stops feeling like something that disappears without permission. It becomes a resource you guard with surgical precision. You stop entertaining conversations that drain you. You stop participating in environments that distract you. You stop giving emotional access to people who treat your presence as convenience. You begin protecting your time with the same seriousness you once reserved for other people's feelings. And this shift alone changes the quality of your life dramatically. Because time, once wasted on noise, now becomes fuel for your evolution. With this growth, emotional independence begins to take root, a form of strength far deeper than self-confidence. Because you stop needing reassurance, validation, or external reinforcement to feel stable. Your confidence becomes self-generated rather than crowd-dependent. Silence no longer threatens you. Judgment no longer shakes you. Misunderstanding no longer controls you. Because you trust your decisions, you trust your direction, you trust the person you are becoming. Emotional independence makes you magnetic in a way desperation never could. Because people are drawn to those who do not need them, but choose them. Those who move without begging for approval. Those who stand firm without demanding praise. And in a world starving for groundedness, your steadiness becomes a gravitational force. This internal stability shifts how you view relationships. Because attraction no longer blinds you. Loneliness no longer misleads you. Attention no longer seduces you. You begin choosing connection based on alignment, not impulse. Based on depth, not convenience. Based on reciprocity, not fantasy. Your presence begins shaping the energy of every room you enter, not because you perform, but because you no longer waver. People instinctively adjust to your tone, your pace, your certainty. As this presence settles into your identity, your perspective widens. You begin seeing how much of your past behavior was shaped by unspoken pressure, by expectations you never questioned, by roles you inherited instead of chose. You realize how many decisions you made to avoid judgment, avoid conflict, avoid disappointing others. And how these decisions silently betrayed the life you actually wanted, because every time you shrank yourself to avoid discomfort, you invited more discomfort into your life. And every time you tried to please someone else, you emptied the parts of yourself that needed your attention the most. Breaking this cycle requires one decisive shift, a shift that separates those who live intentionally from those who live reactively, prioritizing self-respect over approval. And once you do this, everything changes, because you stop negotiating your boundaries to make others comfortable. You stop explaining your decisions to people who would never change theirs for you. You stop apologizing for standards that protect your peace. And with every line you reinforce, the world adjusts around you. People stop assuming access to your time. Stop expecting emotional labor on demand. Stop treating you as their emotional insurance plan. This transformation doesn't make you difficult. It makes you sovereign. And sovereignty is the quiet foundation of all personal power. With sovereignty comes a deeper understanding of manipulation. Because manipulation rarely shows up as aggression. It shows up as guilt disguised as concern, urgency disguised as need, confusion disguised as innocence, flattery disguised as appreciation. You begin seeing how manipulators rely on the very traits society praised in you: empathy, responsibility, generosity, to control your reactions. Once you learn to detect patterns instead of stories, tone instead of words, motives instead of excuses, you stop falling for the traps you once walked into willingly. Manipulation loses its grip because clarity becomes your shield. This clarity also shapes how you handle conflict. Because conflict stops triggering fear and starts triggering awareness. You understand that avoiding conflict destroys relationships faster than facing it does. Because suppressed frustration turns into resentment, resentment turns into distance, and distance turns into quiet hatred. But addressing conflict turns into respect, and respect turns into stability, and stability turns into trust that the people who value you will meet you in honesty. The people who only valued your silence will run. With this new structure built inside you, something profound begins to happen. You stop expecting fairness from environments designed around advantage. Because life doesn't reward effort, it rewards leverage. And once you understand that, you stop seeking justice in situations that were never built to be just. You stop assigning loyalty where only convenience exists. And you stop expecting reciprocity from people who lack the capacity to give it. And this shift marks the beginning of your final evolution. As your awareness reaches its sharpest point, you begin understanding the true value of emotional detachment, not the cold, empty version people misunderstand, but the grounded version that protects your clarity. Because detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop abandoning yourself. It means you observe without absorbing. It means you respond without reacting. It means you think without drowning in the noise of your own impulses. And this gives you a psychological advantage that most people never develop. Because they are controlled by every feeling that moves through them, while you move from intention instead of emotion. And this single shift changes the entire way you navigate the world. With detachment comes presence. And presence is not loud, not theatrical, not attention-seeking. Presence is the quiet confidence of someone who is fully anchored in themselves. Someone who does not rush to fill silence. Someone who does not flinch at uncertainty. Someone who does not crumble under pressure. Presence becomes a force field, invisible but undeniable, shaping the behavior of people around you without you ever needing to raise your voice. Because humans instinctively respond to stability, and when you embody stability, you influence environments without trying. And as all these internal adjustments accumulate, people begin treating you differently. Not because you demanded respect, but because your energy leaves them no other option. The tone they use shifts. The assumptions they make shrink. The expectations they place on you adjust. Because your boundaries speak louder than your words. Your silence carries more weight than your arguments. And your refusal to participate in dynamics that drain you makes people realize that access to you is earned, not assumed. This internal evolution changes how you perceive opportunity too. Because you no longer wait for permission. You no longer wait for perfect timing. You no longer wait for certainty before you act. You understand that opportunity isn't found, it's created. And that momentum is built through movement, not through overthinking. Once you begin acting from purpose rather than fear, you stop noticing how long things take and start noticing how far you've already come. This internal shift creates a new relationship with fear, a relationship where fear stops being a barrier and becomes a compass. pointing directly toward the areas where your potential is trapped. You realize that everything you ever wanted sits behind a discomfort you once avoided. And the moment you start walking toward fear instead of running from it, life stops controlling you and starts responding to you. Alongside this fearlessness comes accountability, not the shallow version people pretend to practice, but the real version that forces you to confront your patterns, your excuses, your blind spots, your past decisions. And instead of guilt, you feel liberation. Because honesty frees you. You cannot change what you refuse to confront, but you can transform anything you're willing to face. This level of responsibility turns you into someone who no longer blames circumstances for their stagnation. Someone who no longer hides behind narratives that make them powerless. Someone who no longer tolerates behaviors that sabotage their future. With accountability comes direction, a sharpened sense of where you're going and why. Decisions that once felt confusing now feel intuitive. Because when your values are clear, your path becomes obvious. You stop following trends, stop chasing validation, stop adopting identities that don't belong to you. And you start walking with a steadiness that others interpret as leadership. Because true leadership is not authority, it is alignment. And people trust those whose internal compass does not shake when the external world does. As your direction strengthens, you begin recognizing how rare true consistency is. Because most people operate from emotion rather than intention. Their effort fluctuates with their mood. But consistency becomes your advantage, your edge, your quiet weapon. Because when you consistently do what you said you would do, when you hold your boundaries even when you're tired, when you stay aligned even when pressured, you become someone people rely on, respect, follow, and remember. And this reliability shifts the structure of every environment you enter. With consistency comes refinement. And your standards rise naturally, not because you force them, but because your growth demands them. Standards are not rules for others, they are commitments to yourself. Lines you do not cross, behaviors you do not excuse, environments you do not entertain. And the moment your standards rise, your life gets quieter, but clarity grows louder. The people who remain are the ones aligned with your evolution, not with your old limitations. With higher standards comes a new relationship with time. Because time becomes wealth. Time becomes currency. Time becomes something you guard as fiercely as your peace. You stop wasting time on people who drain you, opportunities that distract you, habits that weaken you, and emotions that derail you. Every minute you reclaim strengthens the foundation of the future you're building. And then comes the rarest shift of all, emotional independence. The moment where you stop relying on validation, approval, reassurance, or external noise to feel certain. Certainty becomes internal, self-generated, sovereign. And this independence makes you magnetic in a way words cannot describe. Because there is nothing more attractive, nothing more respected, nothing more unshakable than someone who is whole within themselves. Someone who chooses people without needing them. Someone who moves forward without begging for guidance. Someone who stands alone without feeling lonely. And this level of independence cannot be faked. It is earned through every boundary you held, every truth you faced, every discomfort you walked through, and every version of yourself you outgrew. And when all these layers converge, something profound happens, something irreversible. Something that marks the true completion of your transformation. Your life stops belonging to the version of you who tolerated everything, who accepted anything, who explained himself to everyone. And your life begins belonging to the version who chooses intentionally, who acts deliberately, who protects himself without apology, and who understands that self-respect is not a reward, it is a responsibility. And this responsibility shapes your future, your relationships, your identity, your legacy. And as the dust settles, as the noise fades, as your clarity stands fully formed for the first time in your life, take a breath. Look at what you've learned. Look at what you've survived. Look at the man you've become, not loud, not desperate, not reactive, but grounded, strategic, perceptive, and unshakably self-respecting. And if you feel that shift in your chest, that quiet recognition that this message wasn't just truth, but a mirror, anchor it with one sentence. Not a request, a declaration. Spoken not from fear, but from alignment. From this moment on, I walk my path, and I bend for no one.